What is aggregate supply? Aggregate supply is defined as a given economy's total output of final goods and services within a given time period. To quantitatively measure this, economists use GDP. Canada's is 1.5 trillion. So I know what you're thinking. Why do we need to differentiate between aggregate supply and GDP? Well, the answer comes from the use of the aggregate supply curve. This curve is created by plotting the given output levels as the independent variable and having them correspond to price levels, the dependent variable. All of a sudden, this curve proliferates the practicality of this measure and allows economists to make predictions about things like inflation, employment, and even prices. But before we get into the details, let's get back to the curves. Due to the extraneous variables that can arise in the long run, economists have devised two separate relations to accurately depict aggregate supply curves. The first is the short-run aggregate supply curve, and the second is the long-run aggregate supply curve. Let's start by breaking down the long-run aggregate supply curve. Now I'm sure you're wondering, why is this curve completely vertical? The explanation is actually fairly simple, and is attributed to one fundamental property of aggregate supply in the long run. That is, long-run aggregate supply is not dependent on price levels. The straight line indicates the lack of the relationship and communicates that the only variable that varies is the output itself, which is dependent on three things, namely the quantity of resources in an economy, as well the quality of resources in an economy, and lastly, the degree of technology that exists within an economy. These all have a large impact on outputs. But now that you have an understanding of the long-term aggregate supply curve, let's move into analyzing the short-term aggregate supply curve. Now, as I'm sure you've noticed, the slope of the graph is slightly positive and not undefined. This means that in the short run, price levels and output are correlated. This is because some producers will respond to price changes, thus increasing or decreasing their output, just like supply and demand. When demand goes up, so do prices, and vice versa. Not too difficult, right? Well, there's just a bit more to add, because in actuality, the slope is nearly zero, which means many producers don't actually have the ability to adjust their prices. To explain this, though, economists have devised what is known as the sticky price model. The main principle behind the model is that price changes may be immediate for some goods, but slow or sticky for others. Let's illustrate with an example. This is Josh. Josh owns a small and local general store, and to promote his store, Josh contracts a printer to create flyers containing all of his prices. All of a sudden, aggregate demand increases. This is great and makes Josh really happy as he can now charge more for his products. However, he all of a sudden starts to consider the factors that come along with it, such as the in-store labels that he printed, the barcode system that he's already set up for his store, and those flyers that he just made. At the end, he decides that it's not really worth it to raise prices, and therefore, this proves that his prices are sticky or slow to change, proving the gradual incline of the slope. But now that we've examined both models, let's explore how we can use them cohesively to predict trends and understand how our economies react to significant changes. Let's make things easy and use another graph. This graph may seem kind of confusing at first, but when we walk through it, it will all make sense. So as I'm sure you can see, the following graph shows both the long run and short run curves. However, to simplify, we decided to give the short run curve a slope of 0. But now that that's out of the way, let's walk through this graph. Our starting point is the aggregate demand 1 line, and that shows the equilibrium in the center of the graph, point A. So now let's see how this responds to change. Let's just say that the given economy, for an example, raises taxes, and as a result, consumer spending decreases, shifting the aggregate demand line to the left. The result of this is really interesting when using both graphs, because we can see that at first in the short run, point B, we see that only the output decreases. However, in the long run, the economy will gradually adjust and eventually move back to their maximum production capabilities, which now hold a lower price level. This is point C. Graphs like this allow us to begin to understand how the economy acts immediately and how it adjusts to sudden changes throughout the long run. For an extension on this topic, we recommend you look into supply shocks and the Phillips curve, which both build off the concepts that were learned in this video today. But for now, that's all the time we have. So thanks for listening.